A neighbor called the police on a black family, accusing them of trespassing, unaware that they had just purchased the house. This incident exposed deep-seated prejudices and led to consequences that changed the lives of everyone involved. What follows will shock even the most jaded observers. But let's start from the very beginning. Jay Ames and Latanya Green, with their daughter Emily, had just moved into their dream home in the prestigious Belmont Hills neighborhood, a cozy two-story cottage with a spacious backyard. After months of stressful negotiations, they were ready to celebrate their fresh start with a simple backyard dinner. But their joy was short-lived. From his window across the street, Mr. Robertson noticed the family. His attention was drawn to Emily's flashlight and the unfamiliar faces in the backyard. Used to the predictable rhythm of the neighborhood, he immediately grew suspicious. "Who are these people? Why are they in the Hendricks house?" he muttered, recalling the previous owner's abrupt departure. Robertson, unaware the house had been sold, grabbed his phone and dialed 911. "Police, I'd like to report a break-in. There are strangers in the Hendricks house acting suspiciously," he said, his voice trembling with indignation, despite the family's peaceful behavior. Meanwhile, the Greens, unaware of what was unfolding, were enjoying their evening. Emily played with her flashlight while Latanya set the table, and James adjusted the string lights. Suddenly, sirens shattered the calm. 2 police cars screeched to a stop in front of their house. Latanya frowned as James exchanged a tense glance with her. "What's going on?" he asked. Officers stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters. "Hands up, now!" one of them commanded. Latanya raised her hands, holding out their house documents. "This is our home. This must be a misunderstanding," she pleaded, but her words were drowned out by the officers' shouts, ordering the family to the front yard. Neighbors began peeking out of their windows, with some rushing outside, including Tyler, a young lawyer from across the street. Robertson stood behind the officers, smirking with satisfaction. "I told you! This isn't their house. Check everything. They've broken in," he insisted. "This is our house. We have documents," James yelled, his frustration growing, but the officers ignored him, continuing their interrogation. Emily, frightened, began to cry, her sobs cutting through the tense atmosphere and drawing more neighbors to the scene. Tyler, seeing the injustice, began recording the incident on his phone, stepping closer to the police to intervene. The tension was palpable. Robertson's confidence grew as he believed he had done the right thing. But the fallout from his actions would bring consequences he could never have anticipated. The police surrounded the Green family, disregarding the documents Latanya was holding out to them. Instead, they continued firing questions, leaving no room for explanation. "How did you get into the house? How many of you are here? Who else is with you?" one officer demanded, glaring at James with an expression that seemed to already pass judgment. "We're the owners of this house," James repeated, standing firm despite the turmoil boiling inside him. Emily clung to her mother, her sobs growing louder. Trying to comfort her daughter, Latanya said resolutely, "Our documents are on the table in the living room. Would you like to check them? Let's go in together." But the officers ignored her offer and instead ordered the family to stay where they were. "We'll handle this ourselves," one officer said, clutching his radio to call for backup. The tension confused the onlooking neighbors, who began whispering among themselves. "Maybe they really do own the house," someone muttered hesitantly. Tyler, the lawyer from across the street, could no longer hold back. "Officers, I know this family. They just bought this house, and they have every legal right to be here. You have no grounds to detain them," he said, stepping forward. The officers turned toward him, their stares cold and sharp. "We'll figure it out, sir. Stay out of it," one replied curtly. Meanwhile, emboldened by the police presence, Mr. Robertson escalated the situation further. "Don't listen to them. They're hiding something. Search their car, their bags, their house," he shouted, his tone filled with unwarranted authority. From her porch, Mrs. Rivers, another neighbor, decided to intervene. "Robertson, do you even realize they might be your new neighbors? You've crossed the line," she called out. Finally, the officers decided to check the documents. One officer entered the house while the others kept the family on the front lawn. Minutes stretched on endlessly until the officer returned, holding the documents in hand. "They're the rightful owners," he admitted grudgingly. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. The neighbors, who had been silently watching, began murmuring in disapproval of the police's actions. "You mean to tell me they were treated like this just because they're black? You didn't even check the documents before making threats?" Tyler demanded loudly, his voice filled with outrage. Realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, Mr. Robertson attempted to slip away unnoticed, but Tyler stopped him. "Aren't you ashamed of what you've done?" Tyler said, his voice cutting. "You called the police with no basis and humiliated these people in front of everyone." Robertson stammered something unintelligible, his smug demeanor evaporating. Meanwhile, the video Tyler had recorded of the incident was already spreading across social media, gaining traction quickly. The neighbors began siding with the Greens, while the police, aware the situation could blow up beyond their control, issued an apology. Yet, it felt hollow and insincere. "We just moved here to give our daughter a better life. Is this what we'll face every day?" James said quietly, addressing the crowd. His words struck a nerve, leaving many in the group feeling a deep sense of shame. For the Greens, however, this was just the beginning of their fight for justice and respect in their new neighborhood. Tyler's video quickly went viral, sparking a wave of outrage online. In the comments, people decried the actions of the police, pointed out racial bias, and condemned Mr. Robertson's behavior. Local news outlets picked up the story, and by the next day, journalists began gathering outside the Greens' home. Though James and Latanya felt humiliated, they refused to let the incident go unchallenged. They gave interviews, recounting their ordeal, and emphasized the need to prevent similar events in the future. "This isn't just about us. It's about everyone who faces injustice simply because of the color of their skin," Latanya told reporters. Watching from his window, Mr. Robertson seethed with frustration. He couldn't believe he had become the center of such a scandal. "This was just a misunderstanding," he muttered defensively. But his neighbors had already started avoiding him. Some even publicly criticized him on social media, blaming him for inciting the conflict. Meanwhile, complaints about the police's handling of the situation flooded the local council. Under public pressure, an internal investigation was launched. The officers involved were temporarily suspended, and the police chief issued a statement acknowledging their mistakes. However, the apology did little to appease the community. Tyler suggested that James and Latanya host a meeting with the neighbors to rebuild trust. Though hesitant, the family agreed. "If we don't start a dialogue now, this could happen again," James said. The gathering, held in the Greens' backyard, drew a large crowd. Some neighbors came to apologize for their silence during the incident. Others wanted to show support. Mr. Robertson also attended, certain he could justify his actions. "I was just trying to protect our neighborhood," he declared. But his words only provoked irritation. "You weren't protecting anything. You attacked us without trying to understand," James replied, meeting Robertson's gaze. "We're here to be part of this community, not to destroy it." At one point, Mrs. Rivers stood and addressed the crowd. "I've watched this neighborhood for years, and honestly, it's never been this closed off. It's time we rethink how we treat people who look or think differently." Her words marked a turning point. Robertson lowered his eyes, while the neighbors began discussing ways to make their community more inclusive. For the Greens, this was the beginning of a long journey toward reclaiming a sense of normalcy in their new home. After the meeting, the incident prompted neighbors to reflect. Online discussions surged, with many supporting the Greens and condemning both the police's actions and Robertson's behavior. For James and Latanya, the fight wasn't over. Determined to spark change, they began advocating for community reform. With Tyler's help, James met with the local police department to demand transparency and measures to prevent similar incidents. Despite initial reluctance, public pressure led the police to commit to bias training and the review of their practices by independent consultants. Meanwhile, Robertson faced growing isolation. Many neighbors stopped speaking to him, and even children avoided his house. Under mounting pressure, He appeared at the Greens' door one afternoon. "I've come to apologize," Robertson said, holding a homemade pie. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry for how things turned out." LaTanya accepted the apology with measured grace. "Apologies matter, but we hope you'll work on yourself and help make this neighborhood better," she said. The Greens' efforts paid off. They joined the neighborhood council, organizing events like charity fairs and discussions on bias to foster inclusivity. The viral video now highlighted a story of transformation, showing how the community began to address its flaws and grow stronger. Months later, Belmont Hills felt different. Neighbors connected more openly, and the police improved their relationship with the community. The Greens, having faced injustice, became agents of meaningful change. As the story ended, Robertson sat on his porch, watching children play in the street, including Emily. Though not completely changed, he began to reflect on how much he had nearly lost to his prejudices.